Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Convo Couch. I am Fiorella, and I am here with Lisa Savage, who is running for U.S. Senate in Maine. She is running as an independent. Lisa, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me, Fiorella.
So, we had a lot of people who were really excited about your candidacy, who wanted to have you on the show. We tend to interview many candidates, and one of the things that is very, very big for us are the elections, which I hope to discuss with you later, especially regarding election integrity. But I want to start off by you telling us the number one reason why you, as a candidate, are better than Susan Collins.
Well, I'm not a multimillionaire, nor is my husband, for starters.
Yeah.
I don't take donations from corporate lobbyists and then sponsor legislation that they wrote to further enrich themselves. I think those are probably the main reasons that I'm a better candidate than Susan Collins.
Yeah, and as I said before, election integrity is so important. Maine has such a strong, well, Maine has ranked choice voting right now, right? But how can that play into your advantage? And why is ranked choice voting so important for our elections?
You know, frankly, I would not have agreed to run if it were not for ranked choice voting in this race. Ranked choice voting came in a couple of years ago. People in Maine worked very, very hard to get it on the referendum ballot. You know, we have a referendum system here in Maine, and they had to get it on twice. The legislature dragged their feet about enacting it. Finally, they did enact it. It doesn't apply to all elections in Maine, but it does apply to the state level U.S. Senate race. So it's kind of a use it or lose it thing. This particular election, with such an unpopular incumbent who's been enabling the president's worst policies and appointments, is, she has plummeted in popularity here. And so it's a real chance to show what a progressive candidate can do on the ballot when there's ranked choice voting. The Democrats have nominated a centrist, very corporate, another multimillionaire candidate who's currently Speaker of the House in Maine. And I'm the only candidate that supports Medicare for all in the election. I'm the only candidate that supports a demilitarized Green New Deal in this election. So it's a real opportunity for ranked choice voting to show, what we're able to do with it in place. I could explain a little bit about how it works in Maine if you want me to.
Oh, for absolutely, yes.
Okay. Sometimes it's called instant runoff voting, and in a way that name makes it make a little bit more sense. But ranked choice voting basically is like going into a restaurant, looking at the menu and thinking, ooh, I really want the lobster roll, but if they're out, I have a second choice and a third choice. So it's really not any more complicated than that. When you get your ballot, you would see Susan Collins, you would see the Democrat, you would see me, Lisa Savage, and then there's another independent running as well, who's to the right of Susan Collins. So on that ballot, you have kind of a grid, and you bubble in which candidate you like first, which candidate you like second, and you can keep going third, fourth, or you can just rank the first one and stop if you want to. And in a ranked choice voting election, you can really vote your values and your hopes first without fear of spoiler effect, because you can make your safety pick as your second choice. So to follow that logic, if somebody ranked me first, they're very unlikely to rank Susan Collins second, because our policies are really, really far apart. They're more likely going to rank the Democrat second. And if somebody ranks a Democrat first, they're very unlikely to rank Susan Collins second, because those two are far apart. So they're more likely to rank me. So if the election is held and a candidate gets a majority of the vote, so 50% plus one vote, the election's over. No ranked choice voting kicks in. You don't have the so-called instant runoff. But if it's a plurality election where people have gotten 40% or 36%, as often happens in Maine, then they take the candidate who polled the lowest, they cross that person's name off the list. Now they're out of the election. And they look at people who chose that candidate first. Who did they choose second? And they transfer those votes to the other candidates. Now, does anyone have a majority of the votes? If so, winner declared. If not, they go to the next round, cross the next person off. I live in the second district of Maine, which is the northerly, much more low income part of Maine. And we unseated a very unpopular GOP incumbent named Bruce Poliquin in the 2018 elections using ranked choice voting. There were two independents, and when they ran third and fourth, and when their second and third choices were redistributed, the Democratic candidate Jared Golden took the seat to represent us. So there's precedent for this being used in just the way we're trying to use it in this election.
So, is it under any threat right now? Ranked choice voting in Maine? Has there been like pushback? Because I believe the way you describe it, if I'm understanding it correctly, it is a threat to the status quo type of politicians.
Well, it's funny that you would say that, Fiorella, because both Susan Collins and the Democratic candidate have completely ignored me, the other independent, and the presence of ranked choice voting. Everything they say and do is about trying to make people believe that it's still a corporate duopoly race. There's no ranked choice voting in play. It's a weird strategy. They have a very negative campaign going. They've raised tens of millions of dollars out of state, and they have just barraged the internet and network broadcast media with very negative campaigns against each other, attacking each other. The research kind of shows in ranked choice voting that's not necessarily a great strategy, because you don't want to alienate supporters of another candidate because you'd like to pick up their number 2 or number 3 rating if you can. But it is under threat in the sense that the GOP filed a lawsuit to keep ranked choice voting from being used in our presidential election in November. My election, the Senate, has been law for a while and is in place, and there's no threat to that. But it's created a lot of confusion in the minds of voters because they're not sure now, oh, which race does it apply to?
Right.
I mean, I know our Secretary of State understands, and he's going to have the ballots printed correctly. But just this week, the Maine Supreme Court put a stay on the lawsuit that the GOP filed against the presidential election being ranked choice voting. So we're still waiting to find out how they will ultimately rule.
Do you have any idea how this might apply on a federal level? Like, because it's if state by state does it, like you say, then you have to decide for what races and all of that. But what if we were to somehow have this at a federal level? Because we see a lot of push right now because of the two candidates we have, Joe Biden and Donald Trump, that people really want the existence of a third party. Third parties exist. However, they don't have a fair shake against a duopoly. How would this potentially be applicable on a national level?
Well, if I have ranked choice voting in Maine, or even if I don't, we have ballot access for the Green Party here in Maine. I'm going to vote for Howie Hawkins and Angela Walker because I think they're good candidates and they definitely represent my values much better than the other two. How it would work on the federal level, I'm not sure how it would interface with the Electoral College, frankly. I'm not exactly sure how you could work that out. You know, many municipalities around the country have ranked choice voting and have had it for a long time in states all across the nation. Another exciting development is the state of Massachusetts has ranked choice voting on their referendum ballot this November. And I know they're very excited about trying to pass it there, and I think they probably will.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, I think it's so important for democracy actually to have ranked choice voting. But I want to talk to you a little bit about what the politicians who are in power have done right now. The CARES Act had a lot of benefits for the 1%, for mostly for the 1%, but the poor and the middle class got very, very little. Very little financial assistance, nothing regarding healthcare, zero solutions for renters. How would you have voted on the CARES Act and why? And how should Congress act now after everything that's happened with a major eviction crisis on the horizon?
Yes, I don't think I could have voted for the CARES Act. It did have some good provisions. There was money for states and municipalities, for instance. However, the big giveaways to Wall Street and the big corporations, airlines, cruise ships, that was not, meaningful relief. And the people got what, $1,200? I've heard from people that are still waiting for their $1,200. One $1,200 payment. The other wealthy countries in the world gave their citizens enough money to stay home. If the directive when the pandemic hit is you got to stay home so we can flatten the curve, then you've got to make it possible for people to stay home. But really, the biggest failing here, of course, is the lack of a national health care plan. You can't meaningfully tell people, oh, we're handling a pandemic, we're going to take care of the public health, if you don't have a national public health care plan. Something like 1 in 4, nearly 1 in 4, Mainers lost their jobs when the pandemic hit. And many of them lost their health care at the same time, because under the Unaffordable Care Act, your health care is tied to your employment. And many of the people, again, I said, I live in the 2nd district. I just retired from teaching school there for 25 years. The families that lived around me, even before the pandemic, they were just barely hanging on economically. Almost none of them had adequate health care. Nobody had dental care, and just one accident or illness or bad decision would just collapse their whole economic arrangement at home. So even a one-time $1,200 payment is not super meaningful if both wage earners are thrown out of work immediately. Healthcare is lost. I think that the U.S. Congress has shown that corporations send their candidates to Congress. They do the bidding of those wealthy corporations to make them even more wealthy, and the regular people be damned. I was a history major. I often wonder, have they never read history? Do they not know what happens when you allow people to sink so low economically that they really can't feed their children or keep a roof over their head, and there are multitudes of them? You're putting people in a position where they kind of have nothing left to lose at that point. And I don't understand why our Congress doesn't see that austerity for the people has already reached pretty huge proportions, and it really should go no further.
Is there anything they can do now? Because people are, like you said, 1 in 4 people in Maine don't have jobs. In Los Angeles, half of the small businesses aren't coming back. What can they do right now, if anything, to kind of offset the eviction crisis and what's happening right now? Because we're at the brink of economic collapse.
Well, the federal unemployment boost ended, so they should reinstate that, definitely. A freeze on evictions would be a great idea, so that people can stay housed and not have to be dealing with housing insecurity and the public health implications of that right now. And really, we need emergency Medicare for all. Medicare for all could be put into effect quickly. Every doctor in the country has a Medicare number already. Most of us have a Social Security number already. It wouldn't be a huge, enormous program to have to set up. It's already set up. It's already operating. We need to expand it, and we need to improve it, because it doesn't cover now dental, mental health, vision, hearing, things that are very important to be covered. I think that this is an emergency right now. The climate emergency is the real emergency. I'm hearing that the skies over the San Francisco Bay Area are red all day long from when they got up in the morning. And now Washington State, Oregon State, and California are on fire from north to south. Here in Maine, we had a drought all summer. Maine tends to be a very wet place. The farmers had a hard time because we didn't get the rain that we're supposed to get. Climate emergency is the real emergency that's threatening our security, I believe. The pandemic has kind of moved up front and center because it's a health crisis. But I definitely feel that, again, a Green New Deal, emergency federal funding to start building solutions to climate crisis, instead of, how much do we spend on the Pentagon every year? Like more than $750 billion a year. Every year when that bill is being talked about, do people say, oh, where will we get the money? Oh, how will we pay for it? But as soon as you're talking about taking care of people, like Medicare for all, oh, how will we pay for it is, the first thing that everyone comes up with. I think that we have the money to take care of people. If you look at the other wealthy countries in the world, even some not very wealthy countries, they have universal health care, but they don't have huge military budgets like we have. Our military budget is the size of the next 9 countries added together. And that's why we can't have nice things, but nobody wants to talk about that. They just want to say, oh, how will we pay for Medicare for all?
Exactly. And it's because people are, under a lot of stress. A lot of people have been out in the streets protesting against police brutality, which is one of the arms of the military industrial complex. We militarize our police, etc. There have been numerous killings of unarmed black men. The protesters want to defund the police. What's your position on defunding the police, and how would you go about it as far as enacting policy?
I absolutely think that we need to defund the police. That doesn't mean abolish the police. I'm sure that there's a role for a very, very reduced police force that investigates truly violent crimes, against people. However, most of the people that the police deal with are not criminals. Their crime is being poor. The police force, obviously, in many, many, many places, has become infiltrated by white supremacists. Many would argue your police force was born in white supremacy and it continues to enforce white supremacy. I would like to reinvest the bulk of the money that we spend policing on investing in our communities. Let's lift people out of poverty. Let's take away their food insecurity, their housing insecurity. Let's fully fund education from pre-K through college, no matter what zip code you live in. And then let's, fund and employ community workers who, for instance, are mental health crisis workers. Many of these killings that I see, it's a person who's having a mental health episode, and a family member or someone who loves them calls and says, "Oh, please help. My brother's running through the street without clothes on. I need help." And they come and gun them down. The police often say that their argument is that they're too scared. I say, if you're too scared, then you're in the wrong job. Don't do that job. Find another job where the fear factor doesn't cause you to, it's like they're jury, judge, and executioner for someone who's clearly having a bad mental health day.
Yeah.
I think community dispute resolution is another area that we could invest in. I think social work is another area that we could invest in. Why aren't we sending community workers that are trained in de-escalation, helping people get through a mental health crisis? Why are we sending heavily armed, men that are scared? That's not the right person to send into that situation.
Yeah, and absolutely. And you brought up the Green New Deal. A lot of Democrats are now saying that they are for the Green New Deal. But most Republicans in Congress, in addition to being ideologically against climate change and any legislation, they say the bill is not realistic. What's your opinion on the Green New Deal, and how would you propose to move forward towards enacting that legislation, any legislation that deals with climate control?
Well, I'm not a super big fan of the Democrats' Green New Deal. It's a very watered down version of the Green New Deal that originated with the Green Party. I was a Green Party member until I had to unenroll for ballot access in Maine, but I remain green in my heart and my values. And I know that a robust Green New Deal, such as the Green Party backs, includes not only conversion of our military manufacturing base to building solutions to climate change. Maine doesn't really have a public transportation system outside of a couple of cities. We could really use a light rail system like other countries have for public transit and to get us out of our cars. If we were building that at the local weapons factory that builds warships for the Navy, economist research shows it would generate 50% more jobs, good union jobs with benefits, real jobs that you could live on the wages of. So it would be a win for the climate because you would not be building weapon systems, which are terribly polluting. The greenhouse gas emissions of the Pentagon are like the highest of any organization on this planet. They burn more fossil fuels than any other organization on the planet. And it would be a win for climate if you were building public transportation or clean energy systems, solar grids, or offshore wind, that kind of thing. And it would be a good jobs program. So, but a real Green New Deal, such as the Green Party believes in, also includes things like regenerative agriculture, growing food in ways that improves the soil rather than depletes it. It also includes locally owned and controlled energy production, like, consumer-owned utilities for electricity and water and internet. So a real Green New Deal is something that I would vigorously support. As for how to pay for it, again, right now, weapons manufacturers get all the federal contracts. There's no reason. The local weapons factory that I'm staying near here just produced the machines that make the nasal swabs that they use for COVID-19 testing. Normally, they build warships, but they were asked under Defense Production Act auspices, hey, we have some federal funding. Could you build more of these machines? Because the place that makes the nasal swab says they could double their production if they had more of the machines. Of course, they said, yes, you got a federal contract, bring it on. And within a month, they had delivered the machines. Again, it's something we're always told isn't possible, but it is totally possible and could be done without too much trouble.
Yeah, and what do you think of Joe Biden's climate plan? Because certain groups like the Sunrise Movement have been texting me saying, hey, if we get Trump out of office and we get Joe Biden in, we'll have a Green New Deal. Do you think that's possible to have under a Democrat establishment, centrist Democrat like Joe Biden?
Well, the Democrats' climate plan that they put out has a giant Pentagon-sized hole in it because the facts that I was just sharing about the Pentagon driving climate crisis and contributing mightily to climate change, totally missing from their report. They don't even acknowledge that it's a factor. That's the elephant in the room. You can pretend. It dates back, way back to the Kyoto protocols. The US fought hard to get military emissions to not be counted in the Kyoto protocols. They got the concession, then they didn't sign the treaty anyway. But, what is the Earth's atmosphere super patriotic? So it doesn't count the emissions that come out of bombers and jets and so forth. Not looking at the reality of the science of what's going on just means that it's kind of empty words on paper and you're not really addressing the problem, in my opinion.
And speaking of the Pentagon, we've been in Afghanistan for over 20 years. There seems to be no end in sight as the majority of Democrats and Republicans won't vote for legislation that will defund the military in any way, and force the U.S. to pull out their troops. You're a peace candidate. So how do you plan to push an end to these conflicts if the overwhelming majority of congressional members are bought off by the military industrial complex? I mean, we've seen how the squad has also kind of stood back in terms of attacking the MIC.
It's tricky indeed. However, I think that the path forward lies in conversion. As I mentioned before, if we were to convert these manufacturing facilities to building something that helped mitigate climate change, then the federal contracting would still be flowing and the people would still be having the jobs in all the places that the military industrial complex has made sure to have factories. And I don't really see, if all the US really manufactures at this point is tear gas and weapon systems. That's basically what we manufacture. All the other jobs building other things went offshore under all those treaties like NAFTA. That was sent offshore where they don't have pesky unions that stick up for workers' rights and fight for a fair wage and benefits. If we only make weapons, then endless war is a marketing strategy, right?
Right.
What if we stopped only making weapons and we actually made train systems or offshore wind platforms and so forth? I think that would, make the people in Congress realize a little bit, oh, okay, my bread is still being buttered. But, it was a very clever scheme that was, Dwight Eisenhower was president, and in his farewell address, he warned Americans about it. That was a pretty long time ago. And they've made sure to put the pork in every congressional district in the country. I guess what I'm arguing for is we're in an emergency. We don't have time to bust down that whole system, but we could make the pork different. We could build things that people actually need and that would benefit the climate instead of building all these weapon systems.
So you're attacking them economically. You're still, buttering their bread, but getting things done for the climate and for people. I guess that's a very smart way of doing it. A lot of progressives on the left, including Ayanna Pressley and Ro Khanna, not only support the Hong Kong Humanitarian Decency Act, but have co-sponsored this bill, despite the NED having their fingerprints all over the advisory committee. We now see more of these NGOs causing conflict and supporting regime change in Belarus. If elected in the Senate, how do you plan on curtailing these NGOs that are known to most anti-war activists as CIA light?
It's a good question. The CIA is kind of, answerable to no one. And we've seen their efforts at regime change around the globe repeatedly. So I think that a big, big part of our problem is information control. The same corporations that control our Congress control our mainstream media. So most people in the US don't have access to real information about what's really going on in Hong Kong. Who are the actors actually? We see the white helmets in Syria being touted as this great humanitarian force. And then, those of us in the anti-war community are skeptical. And then later on, the truth comes out that, oh, yes, actually, they were, an arm of the evil empire. So how you rein in the CIA, that's a big question. I'm not sure I'm prepared to answer it today, but I do think that Congress could do meaningful things to open up our information systems rather than having them progressively. With each passing year, the internet is more and more censored and more, thank goodness for independent journalists like you who are willing to stick your neck out and do this kind of work. I think it's super important. And I'm sure that Julian Assange would be proud of you.
And that is my next question, because, right now we have the trial with Julian Assange, which, by the way, nobody in mainstream media is even touching. Nobody in mainstream media is even talking about. And the courts declared that the NSA illegally collected data from Americans. That was what Edward Snowden had exposed. And he's been hiding out in Russia for years now. Shouldn't he be pardoned? Assange as well? And why has Congress, once again, including these progressive Democrats that a lot of progressives fought so hard to put in there, so silent on this issue?
Well, I can't speak for why they're silent, but money talks. And it's, big money is behind all of these information control schemes and controlling people that are elected to Congress. And I do feel that Julian Assange is being done a big disservice by the mainstream media outlets like the New York Times and the Washington Post. They published the material that he shared via WikiLeaks, and now they're just going to look away while he's tortured to death, essentially not by the US, but by the UK at the behest of the United States. It's shameful. It really is. Edward Snowden, same thing. I mean, if I think of the three of them, Chelsea Manning, Julian Assange, and Edward Snowden, who were brave enough to bring information that the American people wanted and needed to the fore, and they have suffered mightily for it. Edward Snowden's kind of like the success story, because he got to live in Moscow and his partner came over to live with him, and he's still working and so forth. It's really shameful. What's shameful to me is that more people don't speak up and say it's shameful. But if you don't have information about it, and all your information stream is about, oh, the president has done something egregious, let's talk about that all day long, or what some celebrities are wearing or tweeting, it's hard to be a political agent when you don't have any actionable information, I think.
Yeah, so like you said, access to information is one of the most important things. And even the left here doesn't really talk too much about Assange. So how do we get people to focus on things like civil liberties that sometimes are pushed on to being a libertarian or Republican sort of worry? Because even though, it's freedom of speech at the end of the day, and that also goes for our elections, how do we get people to really pay attention to those things? Because it seems like if we don't get the right information and our votes aren't counted in the right way, we're never going to get a Green New Deal. We're never going to get Medicare for all.
The people have a great power available to them, and that is to withhold their labor. So far, it hasn't really happened on a big scale. I have a lot of hope for unions like the Postal Workers Union or nurses unions or teachers unions. We have seen some, kind of some small strike activity where they realize we can withhold our labor. I'm a great believer that people shouldn't become wealthy off the labor of others, but again, the people that are just barely scraping by, of course, it's very scary to them to think about going on strike. But I think that some kind of a general strike is probably the only thing that's going to bring meaningful change to the U.S.
And just day one, you're in the Senate. What is the first thing you push for?
I love this question. First day in the Senate, I'm going to call Bernie, and I'm going to meet with constituents from Maine that are in D.C., touring the Smithsonian museums. It's a little bit of a joke. I've had several jobs in my life. I was a career change teacher and so forth. So on the first date on a job, you figure out where the bathroom is and who's supporting you, and thank them for that. But as far as the first thing to work on for me, it's Medicare for all. I would, that's on my bucket list. If I could be part of a coalition, of a team that brought Medicare for all to the American people, I could die happy. It's not a one-person thing. I'm not a megalomaniac, but I'm a good collaborator. I was a union negotiator for several years. I know how to work with a team. This is a big team behind me here. You don't see them in the room, but there are hundreds of people working on getting me elected. I'm the spokesperson. They have to trust me that I'll be, true to the message and not suddenly take it into my head that, oh, I'm the decider. But I would love to really, really focus on passing Medicare for all. We're way past the time when it's, a crisis, and most of the developed or industrialized nations got some kind of single-payer universal health care right after World War II. So we are long overdue.
And Jonny has a question, the last question.
Hey, Lisa, this is Jonny. I'm the producer, engineer, live stream engineer, and I have one question for you.
Yes?
And that question is, what are your thoughts on capitalism as an economic system? We're seeing unfeathered capitalism falling like right before our eyes. Would you push for regulating capitalism and reeling it in, or push to move to a different economic system altogether?
Well, I was a history major, and I think elites have been hogging the resources since long before capitalism came into being. So I'm not quite as convinced as the younger generations are that it is the problem. I think the problem is elites hogging the resources. Capitalism has been an incredibly bad system for life on the planet, has been incredibly destructive, commodifying things like water and land. So has been particularly destructive of just our ability to continue as life forms. Again, I think we're in an emergency. I would think that immediately we need to address climate crisis and really focus on that once we have healthcare taken care of. And then, can we reform capitalism, or does it just need to topple and we need to start over from scratch? I don't know. The jury's out on that one. I know there's a lot of suffering and a lot of innocent people that suffer when a system completely collapses, but it's happened before in history, and people pick themselves up from the ashes and go on. I'm always thinking of the children, Jonny. I was a teacher for 25 years. I have grandchildren now. I want what's best for them. I want them to be able to have a livable planet and a future. So I'm open to all ideas, and I appreciate the question. Thank you.
And what are your thoughts just off of that on imperialism? Because imperialism in its in its own way supersedes capital. Capitalism feeds into imperialism, and we have continuously gone after countries and ousted people out of their countries, put our own elected leaders in there. So where does imperialism fall into that?
Well, indeed, I've been organizing against imperialism for years now. And we've been doing a series of informational webinars on issues of the day. My campaign has. And the first one we did was the costs of war with Chris Hedges. And Chris has endorsed my campaign. And it was really interesting to hear his perspective on empires, and we are an empire, always turn inward on the citizens eventually. They're going to project violence outward to the extent that they can, but when they hit that wall, it's going to come back home to roost. I think we're living through that period now, and we can very much see what he means. You know, most empires fall. There's a reason why they call Afghanistan the graveyard of empires, because every empire, Persian empires, Alexander the Great out of Macedonia, and many other empires have gotten bogged down in Afghanistan. And, you know, it's a sign that the U.S. empire is, you know, the dollar isn't as strong as it used to be. Many countries that used to be under the U.S.'s influence are no longer, and they're banding together. And, you know, our century has passed. Again, we can do it gracefully. We can do it as well. We can try to do a transition where we take care of people as much as possible. But this, you know, scrambling after wealth and, you know, billionaires being allowed to launch missiles like we're going to live on some other planet, that's crazy talk. That's a sign that the empire is crumbling right before our eyes.
And Lisa, where can we find you? Where can we find you, and where can we get more information about your campaign?
Thank you. Our website is Lisa for Maine. That's spelled out FOR. Maine has an E on the end of it, MAINE.org. And almost all of our social media accounts are at Lisa for Maine. So you can find us on Insta or Reddit or Facebook or Twitter at those handles. And we have a lot of volunteers from all over the country, and we appreciate that. We have some very interesting ways for people to get involved, even if they're not in Maine. And we've had a lot of support from Greens nationally, because they want to see ranked choice voting show what it can do and see a third-party candidate enter the Senate. So our first debate is Friday night. I'm in the debate, and it's at 7 o'clock. It'll be live streamed on News Center Maine on their website. So we're really excited, and we appreciate your support and inviting us on the show. Thank you so much.
Thank you for coming on. And thank you guys for watching. Please check us out on ROKFIN, and sign up if you can. From Fiorella. All right. And Lisa. Convo out. Bye, guys.